Hello everyone and welcome back to English class. Today we're going to continue with Ben 3. This is our second to last lesson, and our goal today is that we read with an eye on stereotypes and gender norms or rules by considering character actions and appearances. So I want you to look here at this mushroom guy, right, from Mario Brothers. And I want you to think of today as like a way to power up your reading. And what we're going to try to do is read critically. Okay, and there are many ways we can read critically, but today we're going to focus on character appearances and character actions. Okay, so let's remind ourselves first what a stereotype is and what we mean by gender norm. So a stereotype is an overgeneralized belief about a category of people. So when we think a certain group of people act a certain way or have certain characteristics because of their membership in a category. Okay, and we've talked about this before um, in earlier units when we talked about groups that characters belong to. And we talked about this in the Social Issues Book Club unit. Also, a gender norm is the way society expects a male or female to act, right? So what's expected of us in society. Um, so when we look at stories, okay, I want you to look at the pictures here. Okay, have a look at these pictures. And if we were to look at Disney heroines, here we have Ariel, Cinderella. We could think of Rapunzel, Elsa, Anna. Now, they're all brave. They are the heroines in their stories, but they're also beautiful. And most of them are white. So what we might take from this is that to be a heroine in a Disney story, you need to be beautiful, right? So in this instance, we're looking at the appearance of the characters and asking ourselves what message it sends by having all of your main characters look a certain way. Okay, and we may ask ourselves, why is that the case? Why did the author do that? Was it intentional, or is it something that was unintentional, that reflects the beliefs of the author or the beliefs of the time period that the story comes from? So as readers, when we say read critically, we need to be alert to the messages that are coming through the story. So let's think about some stories we've read recently. Okay, we read today or yesterday. We read The Third Wish about Mr. Peters and his wishes. He wished to not be lonely anymore, and the swan turns into his wife, Leda, right? So we could look at the actions here and learn something about the time period and more about the characters. So I have an example here. So Leda, at one point, Leda appears to be unhappy, and Mr. Peters notices this, and he asks her if he can use one of his wishes to turn her back into a swan, right? And her response was, "Who would wash your socks and cook your meals?" Right? So we could take from this that the role or the norm for a wife is to wash her husband's socks and cook his meals. Right? That's one thing we could take from this. Okay. So she asks Mr. Peters this question, and he says, "I'd do it as I did before I married you." Right? So this also it tells us something about Mr. Peters, and we can ask what the author was thinking when they created this. So when I read this story, I'm thinking that Leda has these ideas about what a wife does, and Mr. Peters, he comes across as very understanding. I don't think he agrees with Leda. I don't think he believes that that's her duty. Um, and eventually, he does turn her back into a swan. Um, so we could analyze this more and think about, what are the roles of a husband and wife, and how do they come through in this story, and what does that mean? How does it connect to the theme? Now, I showed you these examples up here with Ariel and Cinderella, but not all Disney movies are like that. For example, Moana does not look like other Disney princesses. She doesn't act like many of them, right? She doesn't need a prince to rescue her, and her idea of happily ever after doesn't include um, living with a prince. Uh, Princess Elizabeth from the Paper Bag Princess. Okay, her idea of happily ever after does not include Prince Ronald, right? So these characters do not fit common stereotypes, right? They're fierce, they're independent, they don't need a man to live happily ever after. So we can ask ourselves, why did the author do that? And then how does it connect to the theme of the story? Okay, so while we're doing this, okay, what we're doing here is reading critically. We're looking at the appearance of the characters and their actions and asking what kind of message this sends to the reader. Okay, and we'll find that some of them fit our beliefs about the way the world is, and some of them don't. But it's something we need to be aware of. Okay? This should also remind you of a lesson we had earlier in the year when we looked at commercials, and we looked at the toys that were aimed at boys and the toys that were aimed at girls. And we talked about how those commercials send a message to the viewer about what girls should play with and what boys should play with, and the colors that boys should like and colors that girls should like. So for us as readers, what we need to do is be alert to these things in the stories we read. So also, if since Moana was released, the movie received a lot of praise because of the way it portrays its heroine Moana, and a lot of that praise comes from the fact that she doesn't fit the typical Disney princess, right? And her appearance and the way she acts is more appropriate for girls than someone like Snow White or Cinderella or Ariel. Okay. Later, I'll share some things with you. A lot of people have written about it, and it's really interesting to read and think about. So as you work today, think about who your characters are, what they look like, and how they behave, and ask yourself if it matches with what's expected of you in your life, or if it's what's expected of your parents. And this is one more way that we can analyze a text.